There we go. Hey, stop touching those blokes. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. Back again with a fun topic tonight. I hope we'll leave it for a little while. We'll start off in safer territory with EVgo, but just a quick reminder, you can find us the day after on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all the good places that audio-only replays can be found. And I'm joined by Eric Way of the News Coolum channel to my left. Just below me is Walter of the Network Architect channel. And we are joined again by Chase Drum from the Grid Connections podcast and consulting. I'll let you talk about that in a little bit, Chase. There's some extra things in there. So you've been really active recently. I want to definitely catch up with you on some of that stuff, but welcome everybody. In the news here this evening, before we get on to the main fun, we have EVgo. 2024 report coming out. Actually, Electrify America did their 2024 report not long after that at the around lunchtime today, but we decided to go with EVgo because we had a bit more information on them. Walter, I think you've done a really kind of good summary of this, so maybe you could give us the headlines and then we can dive into the individual pieces that everybody's interested in.
Yeah, one of the things I really enjoy is cutting through the hype to see what the actual numbers are saying. And in this case, it's unequivocal. There's a CPO that's required to report numbers as a result of being a public company. And the throughput, the actual fuel that they delivered in 2024 was twice as much as the fuel delivered in 2023. In fact, more so. And that's really saying something. I mean, we could say, car sales are going this way and that way, and this brand is doing good and that brand is not doing good or whatever. But even if the point that was being made in the investors conference call is that even if there's no more EVs sold, there's still a disparity of demand between the number of cars that are on the road and the number of DC fast chargers that are available. And so from EVgo's perspective, they're sitting in a very good spot, and they see nothing but growth ahead.
Eric, you've kind of traveled with EVgo since the very early days. Those were your 50 kilowatt support system from Southern California to Northern California back in the day. What did you take away as you kind of looked over the results?
Well, I mean, the usage rates are interesting, right? Because one of the things, it used to be in PlugShare, and ironically, before EVgo bought PlugShare through Recargo, but it used to be one of the things that you could see is usage rate by site. And some of EVgo's sites, like their most used sites, I would say 7 to 8 years ago, were seeing about 25 to 30% usage. And that was like key connecting corridors that nobody else was supporting. And so, and I do personally think that once you start hitting that 30% usage threshold that we're seeing for some of their sites, that's when you really either want to look to expand or add another site nearby. Because if it's being used 30% of the time, that means you're probably running into an issue of lines and queuing at some point in time during the week, right? And so, but those usage numbers, like what Walter was saying, you're looking at since 2022, more than a 100% increase year over year in usage. So for the last, 3 years or whatever, it's been basically 100% increase in usage year over year, which is a staggering increase. And then the thing that sticks out to me, though, and I still haven't seen any sort of verification of this, but EVgo tends to be one of the most vandalized public chargers. There's a number of reasons for it, right? But or there are a number of theoretical reasons for it. I don't think anybody can say for sure. But one of the things that always stood out to me is the reason why EVgo's vandalism rates were probably higher than Electrify America or Tesla's simply comes back to the amount of time that people are using them. Because if someone is actively charging at a site, it's going to be far less likely that someone comes in and vandalizes or someone comes in and cuts cords. So this is almost killing two birds with one stone, right? They're making their network profitable, but by being busier, they're also offsetting the likelihood of someone coming in and vandalizing one of their sites, because there's a higher likelihood that someone's there using it.
Yeah, I mean, the utilization side is interesting. I want to make this point more with Electrify America because I'm using it this way, but you have to factor in the complementary charging plans to an extent. EVgo a bit less so, although Walter can obviously kind of point to the benefits of using that to cross the country, as I did with Electrify America. But there's a point of these, especially on Electrify America, with unlimited plans and the big models like the ID4 and the Ioniq 5, where the numbers are a bit, they're juiced from that, but they're also artificial, because I know for a fact in Boston area there's people who are just using it for that, just charging, purely because instead of charging at home, they're going to the public chargers to use it that way. So there's a little bit of that in, but certainly we're seeing, some pretty high utilization there. And then the one I wanted to pull up, what jumped out for me was this kind of supply lagging demand, which kind of underscores what we've been talking about for most of the life of this podcast, really. Is there's just the congestion piece has always been the biggest. There's a lot going on here, but you can see the over the years, 2020, 2021, they've started off kind of being enough and sufficient to kind of meet demand, but then as demand's increased and more EVs have been sold, they just haven't really, as an industry, we haven't kept up with enough to meet the demand in the places that it's needed. So that kind of speaks to where we are now with all these new players coming in. Although with EVgo's kind of role, they've had an interesting evolution from being very metro area focused and just by themselves, their own chargers being in cities and kind of metropolitan areas, and then with the addition of what's in Walter's background there, those Pilot Flying J sites really started to accelerate 2023 a little bit, and then 2024 especially, really filling in the travel routes and starting to make that much more of a nationwide network in the tourist sense of the word. But it's kind of interesting what our takeaways are individually on that from different regions. We have Chase from up in Pacific Northwest. You obviously use the Supercharger network a lot more than you would use EVgo, but what are you thinking from the kind of initial utilization stuff there that we have covered, and what you've seen from EVgo as a network?
Yeah, I think the highlights that we're definitely seeing just kind of from our firm is, honestly, one of the big takeaways is with that utilization, just like Eric said, kind of the positive outcome is they seem safer, they're more secure, and likely when there is a problem, they're going to be reported quickly. But to me, the big thing around utilization, especially last year, was around how much of their sites were being used by rideshare drivers. And I think that's a really interesting fact as we see that become more electrified, good and bad, especially in certain metro areas with utilization and like having access to reliable charging. But I think it's a really positive trend, and a lot of our clients are kind of excited to see that, just because there's really that threshold about actually having a business with EV charging, and you need to have that utilization.
Right, that's it. I mean, it's interesting to kind of juxtapose the complaints at some of the networks that they don't, or even the states that are not wanting to build out the NEVI chargers or spend their money, that they don't have the EV adoption there. There's some of these places where they just would say there's not enough demand, and then on the other side you've got the EV charging company saying even at our best we can't keep up with the demand to feed this. And that really speaks to the kind of regional patchwork nature of EV adoption as it's been in the States over the last few years. We hinted at it. Well, Walter, I may have had a point there that I cut you off a little bit before I brought Chase in. Anything I missed from you?
Well, I was just going to say, from a selfish standpoint, there was one little nugget in there that I was really happy to see, which was what their extend numbers are anticipated to be for 2025. And it came in a bar graph, and the number is 450 to 550, which tells me that the Pilot Flying J project will increase in velocity through 2025, which is what we were anticipating. There's also indication that starting in 2027, Extend will start to wind down, which also is in line with what the published reports, both initially and ongoing throughout the project, we're entailing. So somewhere around 2027, the Pilot Flying J project should wrap up with 500 stations available for use along travel corridors.
Walter, I'm not remembering right now. What is it right now? Is it about 150, 160 that are open?
137.
Okay.
Exactly. And I mean, you can tell how big that project is by the fact I think they have like 640, 650 pilot travel centers full stop overall. So they're basically doing 85% of the network. Plus, if they choose to go any higher than that, it's just
and those numbers 450 to 550 are number of stalls. So you extrapolate that onto how many stations. So basically, it's a little bit over 100 stations, which is basically more than what they did in 2024. They did about 115 stations in 2024, and then in 2025 we'll probably see about 125. So basically, same pace, but a little bit extra through 2025.
Okay, we won't have time. Well, maybe at the end we'll get to Electrify America, but I have a feeling this will probably run beyond that. So I want to make sure I give Chase some space to talk about what's going on with grid connections at the moment. You've definitely had a bunch of episodes recently. I'm trying to keep up. I think I managed to catch up with Rob Hoffman's episode from the Urban EV podcast this morning. That was really good on New York City kind of city charging and that side of things. And then there was one on Chinese auto market with the EV side of that. Really good stuff. Tell us what you're doing at the moment, what kind of projects you've got on, so we can kind of catch up with you.
For sure. No, and I appreciate that intro, Steve. And honestly, I appreciate the intro to Rob, actually. So glad you enjoyed that episode. It's always really fun to talk with EV drivers who I wouldn't say he's terribly new. He's been researching. And I think a big theme of our podcast has kind of always been a lot of our listeners are what I kind of call EV curious. But I guess for those who might not be familiar, I've been building, breaking, playing around with electric vehicles for over 2 decades now, which seems crazy. And I think my take on what we'll probably be talking about a little bit later this evening is going to be a little different take than probably most are expecting. But what I'm currently doing is I've worked with a lot of OEMs and different groups over the years, and it kind of evolved. The podcast originally started as a COVID hobby to kind of leverage these networks and connections I had. And of course, who doesn't love a bad pun? So given the focus around the grid, the connections I had, I was like, okay, Grid Connections Podcast. Let's throw this out there and see if it becomes something. Well, now we just started our 6th season. And last year, honestly, I've been working in a few different industries, primarily kind of the tech side, but have worked with quite a few automotive startups. And I just started having, honestly, through the podcast, kind of became a lead gen for some of these companies. And so I essentially started a consultancy, and it's kind of pivoted a little bit. It's been mostly word of mouth, but now it's actually, I'm finally building the website, and we're launching it for this year's upcoming EV charging summit and expo at the end of March here in Vegas. So if you're there, I'd love to see it. But kind of at a high level, what we really do is we help businesses, fleets, and advocacy groups kind of navigate the electric vehicle, clean energy, and grid integration space with a lot of like data-driven, policy-savvy strategies that really rapidly accelerate sustainability and profit. That's kind of the high-level, I guess, elevator pitch for what we do. And it's just been a lot of fun. It's just been so great to see the interest around that. And like I said, the podcast started as more of a hobby, and now we're really seeing that traction with businesses. And I think all of your guys' podcast in particular, along with this, but I love what Walter also covers around like the TCO and the operations around the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and just how many different components right now there finally are in the electric vehicle space between the actual automakers, the charging infrastructure, the data layer between all of that, and actually pulling communications and figuring out how to make this thing grow and work, along with the needs with different advocacy groups to different cities and states, and now the federal level with NEVI and everything going on. So that's my kind of elevator pitch at a high level. I know I'm rambling on, but it's just one of those things that it's a little bit of everything right now. That's what kind of makes it so fun. So, and I guess I'll do the kind of shameless plug and say 90% of our listeners do listen to us on Apple Podcasts, but we are finally trying to get to 1,000. Thank you there, Steve. 1,000 followers or subscribers, I guess you call it, on YouTube. So if you could help us, we're almost there. But I'm really excited for tonight's conversation. It's always fun to talk with all you guys, and obviously you've been on our podcast as well. So always my pleasure to return the favor.
Yeah, it's fun. It feels like there's almost an entire group or community of just the EV and energy space podcasters, let alone, everyone we speak to. But, that's awesome. I'm really glad you're moving into that space, and I look forward to hearing more about it later this month. So definitely kind of want to see where you take that. But yes, in the interim, go to Grid Connections, subscribe, and let's get past 1,000 and move on to the next one. So I want to jump to the comments. We usually do the where everybody is and what they're up to. Chase did me a solid and jumped into the live chat very early with Mike Mahan and some of the others. So some conversation there. If I missed any of it, apologize. But we have Ron B from California. He's actually numbered this for me as well. So thank you for the organization.
Yeah, I guess I should clarify. I try to get some blood in the water going. So I was asking 3 questions of everyone who's watching. So I asked them first, where is everyone tuning in from this evening? 2, what EV do you drive, or what are you looking at? And then 3, what's your dream EV? So that might explain some of these answers being a little more formulaic than the normal chaos.
Didn't get far back enough, but I appreciate you diving into it early on. So Chase's answers. Well, you give us your answers. There you go. That'll set us off for the main topic later on. So yeah. So Chase is up in Washington. And okay.
I've kind of bounced around. I mean, Steve, you did your great, awesome road trip through it last year. But I grew up in the Columbia Gorge, technically Hood River, Oregon. Now we live on the White Salmon side, but it's one of the most gorgeous areas in the world. I'm just going to say it. Come at me if you want, but I'm just so happy and fortunate to get to live here. But yeah, I feel like a little bit of a traitor going to the Washington side as a lifelong Oregonian, but we'll see what happens. And I'm just excited to be talking with everyone this evening. And I just love how everyone in it is just from all across the U.S. on tonight's conversation.
Yep, that's awesome, because that helps the Coast to Coast EV's title kind of live up to its name. We need more Canadians though, and that may be something hopefully we can attract back after we stop tariffs and such. Let me see. Mike Mahan, we know from Southern California, Model 3 Highland right now, and a Lexus RZ 450e, which I saw one of those on the roads today, and actually from a distance almost refresh Model Y, I thought. So maybe that's just my bad eyesight aging, but it looked pretty good from a distance. I hope it's as good up close for you, Mike. Let me jump through. So we had Ron. Where was I? There we go. Sorry, catching up again. So yes, he's from California, driving a 2020 Porsche Taycan with just a stone's throw away from the big 100K. Congrats. Want to see that when that happens. Dream car, well, he's got it, so there's nothing to answer there. Still charges 256 kilowatts. I think the Ioniq 5 2025 is getting close to you there, but not quite for very long, I'm sure. But yes, dream EV for most people, I would think. Let's see. We have Sky Malcolm from Ohio. I believe still in a Tesla Model 3. Could have changed. I doubt it, but we'll double check. He's also been in, I'm trying to remember the name. I think it was the Acura ZDX not that long ago, right? But yeah, he was driving it in snow, and as we're coming out of winter here, that was a tank in that sort of scenario. So very, very good vehicle as you navigate that lake effect snow through upstate New York and down into Ohio. So welcome, Sky. Let's see, we have Walter Schultze, who seems to be from Concord, North Carolina, home of NASCAR. That's a familiar name, so if anyone knows Walter, let me know. We have Resins from the seacoast of New Hampshire. I hope you know Greenwave electric vehicles. If you don't, go and have a pop in. They'll let you drive some cool used EVs and maybe even a plug-in hybrid if you want that. But welcome from the seacoast, not just too far from me. What else have we got? There we go. Sky's clarified this further down. Two 2018 Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drives, increasingly concerned about the negative attention they may draw. Elon is a part Tesla does not need anymore. We are close to hitting that topic, but thank you for broaching us there. We have Scott in Atlanta, Georgia, 2024 BMW iX. And there you go. Also another person who's pretty much in his dream EV already. So also intrigued by the Rivian R1S and Lucid Gravity, though. Certainly same here for me. Let's see. We have Paul from Bakersfield tuning in. Chevy Bolt EV Lifer, I believe. Anthony commenting on Eric's background, which is definitely going to be a piece of the conversation tonight. You can go and watch Eric's video after this. It's definitely right in line with this. I don't know if it helped him, the topic tonight helped him publish it, but there's definitely a lot to dig into with that. So thank you for setting us up. Leonard over in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Model 3 Tesla, maybe a Rivian R2, Kia EV9, maybe a Lightning as the next or ideal EV. We do have Canada represented. Thank you so much, Mark Berenger. Please invite some friends because we want to create cross-border unity here. We appreciate you joining us from Newcastle, Canada. 25% better indeed with your EV6. And yes, I'll buy a bit of extra maple syrup just to help out the local economy. Dennis from Michigan, 2024 Tesla Model Y rear-wheel drive, 2017 Chevy Bolt. Definitely concerned about the Tesla mischief in public places, which we will get onto very soon. Let's see. I don't know what else I've got. I think we've got everybody in. No, I haven't quite got there. Andy is down in Florida, 9 for 9 charging at Pilot Flying J EVgo. Good success rate at the other GM EVgo chargers. That is boding well for EVgo and the future there as they grow. Let's see. Patrick on EVgo stations, he says on his East Coast travels, always seem to have only 2 to 4 stations, so tends to not try them. Yeah, I mean, they are, I guess if we're talking the Pilot Flying J stations, there's 2 dispensers, 4 handles most of the time. EVgo's own installations tend to be going towards more 4 dispensers, I think, or 6. But yeah, I understand if you wanted to go something that was a little more heavy stall count. I don't think we've got Brian yet. Brian is up in snowy Minnesota, still snowy over there. Welcome. Hope everything is going well with you. Electrified light vehicles checking in from Northeast Pennsylvania. Kia EV6 GT line. Welcome. Jeff Cornegay from Monroe, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. Back to the Seacoast briefly, just to say 2023 Ioniq 5 SEL. Thanks for clarifying there. Cecil Martin in Cary, North Carolina. This gets longer every week, so I appreciate you all, but I have to up my game of speeding through. Yitzhak Kabinski, I hope I haven't messed that up. South Florida, thank you for joining us. Arkansas e-Traveler, Bentonville, Arkansas, we know you. GM Seed Sierra Denali EV would be his one to go for. That would be back in a truck. Emery thought Walter was from Chicago, but he's down in Missouri right now.
I'm born and raised in Chicago. I'm a North Carolinian, though.
You got your lives. Jeffrey from Novi, Michigan, Cadillac ELR, CT6 PHEV, and Hummer EV to Lyric and Escalade IQ. Wow, that is definitely Michigan based, so congrats on those. We have Darren, who is firmly in the Tesla mold and just added a new Model Y to the family. Fantastic. We can get your side of that story very soon, hopefully. Come back anytime, obviously, so you can tell us about that. Tom Palmer tuning in from San Diego, 2020 Bolt EV, Porsche Macan, but he would settle for an IQ5. And last but not least, high-speed golf cart, excellent name. Central Pennsylvania, all Bolt, no Teslas. So high-speed golf cart indeed. Rocket ship, we used to call them. But thank you, everybody, for letting us know where you are, what you drive, and what you would like to drive. So on to the main topic. Tesla. They have been certainly in the crosshairs for most of their life, really, but it's been increasingly more concerning as we've entered election season last year and then into the new year. Things have been more than polarizing, really. I mean, it's to a point where people are certainly considering selling their vehicles. Some people have sold their vehicles, but we're also moving from the crazy postman kind of exclamation point of put a bumper stick on it that fixes everything to unfortunately something I had to check out yesterday over in Fulton, Massachusetts, burning supercharger. So I can toss up my little video here, which thankfully is already out of date, which we'll explain in a second. I'm stuck in at the moment. But essentially, so Monday morning, very early, those were set on fire in a suspected arson attack in a place just a little bit northwest of Boston here. Tuesday I visited, this was yesterday, to kind of see what was going on. They had the security fencing up and all that kind of stuff. And then today actually got confirmed by Tesla Charging that they're back in the ground, have been re-energized, and so within essentially 48 hours, a little bit more maybe, those have been replaced. So if you want a piece of why Tesla is so revered in this industry, all you need to do is look at that. Something that has been kind of targeted as a way to kind of get back at the company has been turned around into, this is why people were so excited. We've covered it ad nauseum as to why we may not be that excited about the Tesla Supercharger network opening, for various reasons. As a Ioniq 5 driver, 800 volts, charging slowly, but as a pure machine of a company for turning these things around and getting things fixed, this is why their reliability is where it is. So I mean, there's just a little microcosm. That's the worst example I've seen so far of it. I think it's fair to say that it most likely was targeted coming after a weekend of protests at the company. It seems unlikely that this was a random event, especially in a weird area of Massachusetts where it's not really Boston downtown. It's kind of overflowed out of there, I think, from the weekend's activities into the week. But I guess, Chase, can we start with you, just because you have a Tesla and you're kind of in this, and probably the most you've owned one for the majority of your EV driving career. I think at this point you've go back away, but I know this has been your kind of daily driver for the longest time. What do you just give us a kind of rundown of what you're seeing and how quickly things have kind of shifted in the last 2-3 months?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to give a little background, I mean, I drove a 2013 Tesla Model S back in the day for kind of a business and R&D work. So, I mean, as far as driving Teslas, I've driven them for quite a while through many evolutions of them for over a decade now, which is another reason it sounds so crazy. I think some of the work we do at our firm, and then also just like looking at reality and social media, I'm consistently surprised by the disconnect from reality. But I mean, to just go back to what I was saying, though, is like driving an EV has always been controversial. It used to be maybe you get coal rolled, or maybe someone's, I mean, I lived in Portland, Oregon, which is about as far left as it goes. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's unfortunate what's kind of happened over the last couple of years, but it's one of the most beautiful cities. It's really underrated. But people would get angry back in like 2013, 2014, because they thought I should be driving a bike instead. But I mean, of course, I was doing long range things, doing testing. That's all another thing. I mean, as far as the last few months, has there been negativity on social media? But once again, I think there's a pretty big disconnect with reality on that front too. Coincidentally, we had gotten a new 2025 Silver Model 3, Quicksilver Model 3, and my wife was driving it. Her office is in downtown Portland. She works mostly remote, but every now and then has to go in. And so I was like, well, it's going to go, and this should be interesting. And not only did nothing happen to it, she had two, and I think this is what's so awesome. She had two different women come up to her and ask her about the car and how she likes it. And that is one, I just love seeing that. Like, let's face it, we're not the most diverse panel here today. And EVs, Tesla or not, do have kind of a issue when it comes to women and approachability and getting more EV drivers as women. And so I thought that was just such a fascinating thing. This one day she went in, 2 different women asked her about the car. And so like the disconnect between reality and what I've seen, I don't know. I think the good and bad about Tesla is it's always been a super clickbaity, super ad engagement, anything good or bad. And we've seen this through the past decade. Obviously, within probably the last year and a half, there's been just more public, obviously like Elon's connection to like going to the right and stuff. But I mean, what's really fascinating to me, at least like how we look at this, where with our firm is, and even with what we're seeing like anecdotally through social media, when there is some post that someone tags a Cybertruck, or in this case, those Superchargers that get burnt down, it's like consistently we see anywhere from 65 to 80% of people who see this or are asked about it do not approve. And in fact, when they see something like that, like whether it's a car being keyed, they have so much interest in personal property damage that I do find. And what we're kind of seeing is like with some of these people really that are trying to make a statement about Elon, whatever they want, however they want to protest, totally understand it's a free country. I love the ability to be able to protest and do these things. I was in Portland, Oregon. We have more protests per day than anything you can think about. But it's just been really fascinating to even see. I've even noticed some things we've been tracking within the last week that I think that's actually starting to be tamped down already because of the negative pushback from centrists or like people who just aren't that politically motivated when they see personal property destruction. And to be honest, during 2020 and a lot of the protests that unfortunately would turn more violent, that can be effectively used as more political ammunition for either usually the opposing side. So I think speaking personally, yes, there's people that are selling their EVs. And I think there's valid concern if you're worried about keying and you want to get rid of it. That's what makes it great. Get rid of it. I don't care. Personally, I'm loving my cars. I think once again, I think what saddens me personally the most is just kind of seeing the division in the EV community. I totally get it. If you don't want to like the owner of the company, that's fine. That's one thing. But EV ownership is still, even though it's come so far in the last decade, is still a very small and rare portion of drivers. And we should be, if someone wants to get a Tesla and they disagree with you, great. If you can still at least get a beer with them and they do it in a way that you're not angry by after the conversation, or you can disagree with them, we should be getting more EV drivers, whether you believe about the original mission of it being environmental or about the mission of independence. I think that's such a big thing. That's something Mike Murphy and I of the EV Politics Project recently talked about. It's just like EVs, Tesla or not, really connect with a lot of people by the ability to be your own gas station at home. And I think that's such an awesome thing. That's a big part of my own electric vehicle journey. And so, is there division? Yes. Is there social media gone crazy again? Yes. But I just really think as far as like what happens in social media to reality. Now, I may have height privilege, I was told once. I'm 6'3". So people usually don't come up to me and come up to my face as opposed to text blindly on social media about how they feel. And let's see, I'm sure they're lining me up on the chat right now. But I think personally, like, more EVs is good. If you don't like Elon, that's fine. But if you're politically or personally motivated to be against him, the best thing I can probably say, if you want to be successful in that mission, go out and protest. That's great. But everything we're seeing stats wise, and as far as like social media tracking, as far as that negative, like the intention of trying to tell someone not to get into a Tesla or not to get into an EV, usually pushes more centrist 65 to 80% of the time, and people in the right to be like, no, actually, why are you doing personal property destruction? I realize that might be a little bit of a different tangent from the specifics you want to go over, but like personally and professionally, I'm just not seeing as big of a thing in reality. And like I said, I drive in Portland pretty regularly. I drive in the places where these big things are happening. You know what? Actually, I'm sorry. I'll let everyone else jump in after this. The one thing that did happen to me recently, was about a week ago. There was a protest downtown and there was like 30 people. I drove by and I got a thumbs up, or thumbs down. And I don't know if it was because they were protest. I mean, they were all kind of and there was also these massive like trucks in front of me. So I don't know, maybe it's for them, maybe it's not for me. But in the scheme of like EV hating and ownership, shit, excuse my French, 5 years ago, people might roll coal or do something like this. To me is, and it's, once again, if people want to politically identify and make EVs even more political, fine. And I think that's what's great is there's so many options now, a lot of great cars in different ways. I've stayed with Teslas just because it's something I know they're still really a competitive value for the products. And I mean, with so much of the conversations we have with these different communities, whether it be state, government, and private, and even in some cases, just even citizens, the software level is such a software layer is such a big thing in that communication of making EVs much more approachable. I know there's certain parts of the Tesla OS and Tesla experience that people don't like, and Rivian and some of the other startups have done that. But like, this is a big conversation we have about how you approach, like, it's the domestically, the EV startups, and the Chinese. But I'm sorry, I'm going all over the place, and I realize we could probably have 5 podcasts with what I just talked about. So I will get out of the arena and let someone else jump in.
No, I think it was worth going through. And obviously, I made a comment in there. I will try and keep up with the comments and everyone's points, but just be aware that because it's such a clearly polarizing issue, we're going to have so many in there. I won't be able to get to everybody, so I'm going to try and keep up with them. But I think that's valuable to have you go first and lay that context, Chase, just from where you are, and it's a political spectrum side, but then you're in the vehicle that is on the other side of the spectrum now somehow. But it kind of typifies the the underlying current here of whether people are actually seeing it in real life versus what they're seeing on social. Now it is happening, clearly we're seeing real world effects. Yeah. But and there's people in the comments that we'll get to, we know Brian Ribby up in Minnesota, it's one of those states that is a blue state. It's, he's in it for the long haul. He's, outstanding road trips for years before any of this was an issue. Just, the loveliest kind of wholesome content you can get. And now it's thrust into this weird realm of, politics that I don't think anybody would have expected, when they first got into the car. So it's kind of worth highlighting the timeline here. But Walter, I want to make sure we give you some time, because I know Eric's got a whole piece to go on to, and we may have to reference his video and then kind of move into the next one. But let me give you a little bit of space to kind of speak to what you're seeing and maybe react to some of Chase's points there.
Certainly, and I just need to qualify that I don't participate in the 24-hour news cycle. I purposefully remove myself from that, and it's not because I'm trying to be sheltered and insulated. I just don't find a lot of productivity in what's going on. So a lot of what is going on in the chat over here, I'm not really aware of. I do know that there's downsizing of the federal government going on, and the tariffs were here, and then apparently the tariffs were not here or something. I don't really know the details. But specifically about Tesla as a company and Elon Musk as an individual, in my personal opinion, the hype around Tesla has been occurring for a very long time as a result of people who are motivated for environmental reasons to push a EV agenda and ride on the coattails of Tesla. And so they've kind of had a self-sustaining perpetual motion machine with free marketing from people who are very supportive of them. At least that's been my take on what has been going on. Also, there's the element of disruptive technology and the excitement of shaking up the institutions and all kinds of other things that are liberating about Tesla, and the unique curiosity of the technology and all those things. But when you get down to brass tacks, Tesla is a car company that has 3.5 factories with a market cap close to $1 trillion. And those two things do not match up. At some point, it's going to have to come into a balance, or they're going to have to invent Skynet. And I don't think Skynet's going to get invented. That's my personal opinion. And Elon Musk right now is doing what he's doing, and there's unequivocal evidence that his behavior is having an effect on the stock price. And most of his wealth is a direct result of the stock price. The job of a chief executive officer is to increase the price of the stock of the company. That's basically the job description of a chief executive officer. You're supposed to try to come up with ways to make the stock price increase. And in his case, it also directly affects his personal wealth. Now, he could actually make more money by stepping down if he wishes to continue on a course that is controversial than staying as the CEO. So at some point, it's going to become, I think, a business decision for him where his own personal wealth can increase if he steps down. And I actually think that's what's going to happen. Hopefully, the entire bubble bursting of Tesla, which could be very catastrophic for EV adoption as a whole, because they're the market leader in production globally. Hopefully that doesn't like bring the entire company crashing down as a result. But I do think there's some adjustment needing to take place in the overall Tesla stock, just because of the disparity of the hard numbers of them being a car company that has 3.5 factories and $1 trillion in market cap. Those two things just don't match up. Obviously, they're speculative promises that are keeping the stock price inflated. And so it's really not what's going on now. The question is, will the 10-year plan actually play out the way that it's being described it will? And so until the decision is made there, and my personal opinion as a technologist, the concept of using optics alone for autonomy is inherently flawed. You know, if you have a grocery bag fly in front of your car and the brakes slam on, that's an intuitive mistake that is very difficult to solve with optics. I think you need something like the constellation of the Starlink, low altitude satellite, low latency, in order to provide some real-time telemetry of additional cars that are going along a road. That would probably help solve autonomy quite well at high speeds. And the first thing we should see with Tesla autonomy would be inside the tubes at Las Vegas. And if they can't do a rideshare service in the tubes of Las Vegas, I mean, we're being fed a line that they're going to be able to do it in the open roads. That's just not reality. So we need to crawl, walk, run. And so far, I haven't even seen a crawl. At least that's my opinion, which means the stock price is due for a rather severe adjustment. And this whole political disparity that's going on might well trigger the unfortunate bubble bursting.
I will say, I mean, I don't know the full autonomy, and the plans for robotaxis are further off, but I've always been kind of skittish about full self-driving and the autopilot pieces. It's never impressed me until the last couple of times I've been in one, when my in-laws have had a new Y, and it's had the free, I think it's been extended to like middle of the year now, but they essentially, you know, have a free version for 6 months. It's outstanding. It's really, really very good. And I'm talking about, for me, Boston, suburban Boston roads, which are the most European roads that you could find maybe outside of Quebec City and up in Canada. The weird junctions that don't make any sense to anyone who hasn't driven them 100 times. It mostly got them right. And like, I mean, again, it's hard to get, this is kind of coming on to the bit that I think Eric will be able to speak to, and kind of separating the machine from the man that's kind of increasingly behind it, but further and further away from any interest in the kind of boring earthly, you know, pursuit of vehicles and you know, cars, which, you know, don't even go into space unless he fires them there. But the technology has got me to a point where I'm kind of like, I wouldn't buy one for it, but I can see why it's being pegged as such a big selling point of the vehicle, because I haven't seen other systems that around town in a place like Boston get me there.
I actually have a question for. No, I'm sorry, not to cut you off, Steve.
No, go ahead.
What's the last time you've used FSD?
I've never used it.
Okay, I would actually push back on two things you said there. I don't want to jump in and be too divisive, but I'm reminded of what a multiple LiDAR engineers told me in 2015. What the hell? This thing's all going to go camera someday anyway. And that has what we've seen with, and I think there's two things I want to add. One, I have been shocked by how good the latest hardware 4 version of FSD is versus like hardware 3. It's still pretty 9-day. Hardware 3 is like a really nice ADAS. Hardware 4 is like, it drives, in my experiences when I've used it briefly, it drives better than most Uber drivers I've been in quite a while. Like it's that big of a night and day difference. Just full clarification, I don't own the stock. I'm not trying to hype it. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if it's going to be Tesla or Elon Musk that will be able the first to solve self-driving. But everything I've seen over the past decade in the attempts for autonomy, that is probably the most likely outcome. And maybe it's not them. Maybe it is a Chinese EV company, to be honest with you. But as far as latency, that is the exact issue we had with Cruise. You run into so many issues. And the problem is the more hardware you add, it does not automatically solve the problem. By adding more hardware, you need more computation. And that more computation power means that you have to use more processor and all these things. It seems like it might be a one-to-one, and it generally is not. And we're even seeing a lot of these Chinese EV manufacturers pulling back on how they use LiDAR. And I think maybe there might be an argument for like using infrared or even some advanced radars that we're now.
Multiple different solutions, simultaneously.
Yeah, but
and really my major concern is like if it's dark out, snowing, I just wouldn't let go of the wheel.
And that's totally fair,
Yeah.
To have that belief. But I think it is scary. And like I said, I don't know if it's Tesla or it'll be a Chinese EV company. It is scary how effective that and the ability to respond, that a lot of an AI first solution with a camera based system. If you want to use radar as redundancy, you can. But I'm consistently like, it's domestically, it's probably going to be Tesla that does it. I've been driving a lot in Waymo. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't want to go on a whole tangent with this, and I don't want to be like Mr. Tesla hype man, but I had a great conversation with Tule of Sino Auto Insights on one of our recent podcasts, and he was talking about, we were kind of talking about this. There's a different way that the Chinese EVs have kind of gone about this, and obviously more liability taken on. Allegedly, Tesla is going to launch that later this year with some in Austin and possibly California. But I think really the big standout thing has been just how much better in prediction, execution. And I used Waymo quite a bit. And I like to take people who know nothing. I took my in-laws in one. They were freaked the hell out. And as kind of a recent, call it test, I had them in our car and I drove them all the way from their house to dinner. And then I asked them, what'd you think of that drive? Like, that was fine. I was like, I didn't do anything. And they couldn't believe the 9-day difference between, and don't get me wrong, I think some of the stuff Waymo's doing is also really impressive. And domestically, those seem to be the two most successful players. Mm-hmm. But when you start talking about this offboarding of processing and driving, like Cruise and kind of that latency with Starlink, you run into too many issues. And I think that's actually where a lot of the potential for danger can happen. But don't get me wrong, there are still a lot of variables that have to be solved. But I think that's where you're chasing those nines, as they say in the space.
Yeah, and I definitely defer to your specific.
I love Mark's comment.
Your specific knowledge. Your specific knowledge here. So I do not have any specific knowledge in autonomy engineering, and it definitely sounds like you do. So I would definitely defer to that. It's just
I'm not trying to jump on you or anything. I really respect your thoughts on it too, Walter. And next time you're on the West Coast, if I make it on North Carolina, I want to give you Ryan this, and I want you to just hate it. Like, tell me why you hate it. I always find that fascinating, or maybe you'll like it. But
yeah, as a technologist, I'm always very leery of promises that technology are going to solve some kind of something. So I've just seen so many promises come and go by the wayside. It was just not too long ago we were talking about blockchain being a dramatic shift in society, and does anyone even know how to spell blockchain anymore? It's just, the list goes on.
Not that I want to put you off a road trip, Walter, but my in-laws are in North Carolina. You can probably borrow their Y if you really want to try it. So Chase can
send them out. We got a guest room.
Chase can come across and see if it can have no interventions across the entire country. Eric has been stoically silent. He has got so much to say that it's almost like Mark and
jump in.
So, Eric,
water's warm.
Yeah. We're going to move on to various pieces of this, but we definitely want to kind of unpack what you've published today and kind of give us a little bit on the scope of that video that people can watch after this, and then go into wherever you want to go.
Well, and I just wanted to start by, and this is actually kind of an area of contention, which is what ultimately led it into that video. Is there's this snuck premise all the time that it's Tesla, and Tesla is synonymous with EVs. But that's the problem, right? Tesla never has been synonymous with EVs, and they've been one of the biggest players, but in some ways I mean, not anymore, right, with BYD. And they've not necessarily always been the best cars. Like the joke that I always used to use is Tesla makes the best EVs. They don't necessarily make the best cars that are electric. So there's this assumption, right, that we're conflating hate against EVs with hate against Teslas. I don't see that happening. I think it's very, very brand specific. It's very, very focused at Tesla. And then the other thing that I would say too, just to broach from this FSD conversation, is there also seems to be an assumption that because other people aren't doing it, they can't do it, right? Tesla is one of those companies that always does things and then asks permission later. And so one of those areas is city driving, right? So you mentioned Waymo and Cruise, right? Waymo and Cruise had to get specific authorizations to do their level 4 autonomous.
And they're totally different levels, because it is
right.
where the liability shifted, which is totally fair.
Right. And so, but all of these automakers have made the active choice to not do an FSD-like system that works outside of freeways and highways. So if you take Super Cruise or Blue Cruise on a freeway, it competes very well, even with the latest version of FSD. The difference is they've mapped specific areas where they're willing to let it operate. So the assumption is, because they don't operate somewhere else, that they're not as capable. I don't know that that's necessarily true. And personally, just my take on it, until there's some sort of redundancy within the system, until there's some sort of additional backup beyond just cameras, because we know cameras can't do depth perception. We know Tesla doesn't necessarily even have the best cameras, right? They're still struggling to do the 3D stitching that other automakers have been doing for years now. Until those systems are all redundant and in place, I wouldn't want to see these systems freely used within city areas, right? To me, that's almost akin to reckless driving, because you get to disavow any responsibility. You get to say, well, the car was driving and it did 35 in a 25-mile-an-hour school zone and ran over a kid. I'm not at fault. That's not an area that I'm personally safe being right now. So, but that being said, that's why I said I feel like we're conflating a lot of different issues. And I think the topic of the day, right, Steve, is, can we separate the man, the myth, the Musk from a car company? And I don't know that we can. My video that I did, I kind of broached a subject I don't like to broach in my channel, which is politics. And I've seen some people talking about it's a left-wing backlash against Tesla. And Steve, I know with the British connection, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There aren't actually very many left Americans. What we call left would be centrists at best in most other countries. We don't really have a left-wing party. We don't really have a left-wing base. The base that we do have, if you're a leftist, you're generally doing a peaceful protest. You're not vandalizing. You're not breaking things. And frankly, if you're a leftist, you probably can't afford a Tesla in the first place. Like I hate to throw the economics into it, but you're talking about people who are pushing against a capitalist system. And if the average EV owner makes $100,000 a year, you're not probably talking to leftists. You're talking to liberals and you're talking to conservatives. And right now, what I feel like we're seeing with Tesla is a liberal backlash. These are liberal centrists who put their blood, sweat, and tears into pushing Tesla as an organization, as the next coming of electric vehicles, and then they feel betrayed now by Elon, who I don't actually consider to be political at all. I actually think he's an apolitical actor. If you look at everything that he's done in his appointed position, which isn't really appointed, it's not a position that technically even exists in the government. Every single thing that he's done is connected somehow to one of his businesses that is either being regulated, being sued, being investigated, or in the case of USAID, was it OpenAI who got a contract near the end of 2024? Now that contract's going away. OpenAI, one of his biggest competitors, done, right? And so I see that level of conflict of interest is completely apolitical. It's simply him leveraging his capital to gain that political access and then use it to quash any sort of investigations, any sort of regulation, or any sort of competition that he might face. And so that's why I said it's not a political issue at all, but it is that issue where I think it does tie back to Tesla, because you can't tell me that if he wasn't the world's wealthiest person, thanks to his Tesla holdings, he would have gotten the same access into the White House. He wouldn't have. He would never have gotten that sort of level of access, or, he wouldn't have been able to force his way in to a company. And Walter, you're mentioning this, a $1 trillion market cap company that has 3.5 factories. Another number that I looked at, GM literally has double the revenue of Tesla, and their market cap is 18 times lower. These are not fundamentals that make sense. This Tesla, as share prices were pumped and pumped and pumped, a lot of the people who did that pumping dumped them in 2022. And now other people have bought in since, and they're on the hook for what's really an overvalued stock price that's inflating Elon's worth, that allowed him to buy a social media platform that's highly influential in elections. And then he's using that social media platform to then control political voices, opinions, squash free speech. Essentially, certain voices are not getting platformed. Other voices are getting, the megaphone put to them on his social media platform. So he's bought all of this access, and all of that is owed back to a company that he didn't even found, and he took over in a hostile way, and then used that revenue and that access and that privilege that came with that to then kind of shoehorn his way into a political position that doesn't even exist. So separating those two at this point, I can see why there's so much backlash against Tesla, because it literally is the foundation with which he can do the things that he does. And I know there's other debates about whether he's actually a fascist, or whether he actually believes some of the white supremacist dog whistles that he's done on social media. And the only thing that I will say to that is the gesture that he made multiple times on national television. If you think it was just innocent, if you think it was just an accident, do it in public. I dare you to go to your boss in a meeting in front of other employees and make the same gesture, because other people have emulated him and then been fired or removed from their appointments or offices as a result. And this is something that type of symbolism, that type of iconography is literally illegal in many foreign countries, which is why we're seeing these sales tank. And there are consequences for those actions. So I don't know. I don't see there being a way to separate these things at this point. And really, I don't want to see Tesla fail. As a car company, I think they're super important. As an infrastructure company, I think they're super important. The number of jobs they provide in the country, the revenue, right? And then the people who drive Teslas are not the problem. Right. But the fact that it's valued as high as it is, and that value is then being used for political purposes, that's the problem. And if we can disconnect those things, then I think a lot of those issues go away. So anyway, that might have been even more articulate than my video. I'm done.
Good that I've got everybody has spoken at least. So in my efforts as a British diplomat, I've made that happen. I want to go to the comments briefly here because I want us to kind of step back a sec. We've covered a lot of ground there. I want to see what everybody else has kind of put in the chat here, and then see if we can get back to. Well, let's see what the kind of common consensus in the comments is, if we can make that. So Reed has loved Tesla, loathe Elon. Tesla needs new leadership. I'm just going to read these out so we have a kind of flow of this is what the wider audience feels. Sky, we've been there on this comment, but he's increasingly concerned about the potential negative attention it might draw. Elon is part Tesla does not need anymore. Mike, Elon needs to move on. We had Crazy Postman. Is always good for some humor, but the Massachusetts Supercharger says, hold my beer. I mean, to that, it's more again, back to my point that Tesla is also this team, and increasingly more this team of people who are exceptional at their job and industry leading infrastructure people, software developers, a lot of pieces that are important to this industry. We keep rolling through. Protests are good, damaging property is idiotic, says Patrick. Followed up by Raisins. Yes, exactly. Please don't be that person making physical mischief against EV-related things, not the way to be. More from Sky. Even in bland Columbus, 100 protesters at the Tesla store here in central Ohio. Peaceful as he understands it. Leonard, back on the side of violence against the vehicles. Someone tried to run a shopping cart into his car when they saw it was a Tesla this week. That's the real concern of somebody just living day to day with the vehicle. Bob, actually, we're just on a not Tesla here, but I wanted to catch up, so it gives us some respite. Bob in Cleveland in a 2023 Ioniq 5 SEL, looking at the Rivian R2. You are tracking my very sentiment there to the letter. Cheddar Kung Power feels that Chase downplays the division that has spiked since Elon started ripping apart the federal government. That's Tarek's point. It's not the same as it was even in December, let alone October. Brian, who I referenced up in Minnesota, has been driving Teslas for as long as I've been watching his channel. Discussed selling the Model Y, but bought when prices were high, PPF, full self-driving, etc., etc. So they'd be underwater in that, but again, back to the point of the machine, they love the Y. His videos, show exactly how great that's been for him and his family. As a machine and a vehicle, it is doing what they need it to do and then some. Tom Palmer, anti-Musk, and by extension Tesla. However, arson and vandalism has no place in my book. Peaceful protest, fine. Now, if Musk gets pushed out of Tesla, he would be fine with Tesla. Mark, in Canada, I think the test of public sentiment will be the impact of US and Canadian sales numbers, not looking good in Europe right now. To that point, that's kind of where I think it's, maybe we can agree there. I mean, in Europe, this is tanking sales. There's no doubt about it. I understand the kind of the stuff that swirls around these topics over there is much more kind of spiky because it is, it's our lived history. That's what the continent has been through and is kind of facing to an extent again now. And there's a lot of bloodshed, in the history of the countries that have kind of been shed to keep it the way we want to keep it as Western Europe is now. So that is not going to recover. That the Tesla brand is damaged there now for as for the foreseeable future, and probably until there's some separation between Elon and the brand as a whole. In North America, we have some sense that might be the case, but we have to wait really till Q1, end of the quarter, the third month, to really kind of see what that's looking like. But it's hard to kind of look at these things. I mean, if it obviously one fire, I think we're all saying that vandalism, physical damage, threatening anybody is completely unacceptable. You can find examples of that, political violence on any end of the spectrum that you want to, and we can certainly, that's for a different show, a different podcast. I don't want to really get into any of that because there's plenty of examples that you could find from all across the spectrum. in the North America and in Western Europe. It's everywhere. So that's kind of a whataboutism for another day, I think. But objectively, this is damaging the brand, right? I kind of want to come back to Jace a bit because we've been long since we've got to you, but I think when it's impacting everyday people in this way, not just the supercharger example, that's inconvenient, but for people, I think it's more like the kind of thing that Leonard describes. It's just people potentially having that second guessing now. Is someone going to key my car? Is somebody making a gesture at me because of my vehicle? There's a whole lot of this stuff that the bumper stickers are kind of an interesting little jokey thing until it starts to become real violence, real threats, or just the sense of it. Nobody wants to drive a vehicle and have that be the prevailing thought as they drive down the highway or the town center. So I don't know, Chase, you've just soaked all this in for the last 60 minutes or so. What are you thinking as we kind of come out the other side?
No, I mean, I think a lot of what's been said, I totally understand and agree with. I was just, part of it was trying to bring up to what we've been seeing in the last few months and where things are going. As far as the brand, I guess my question would be for the people on this. I'm generally curious. Do you think he has to leave the company completely, or do you think he just has to vacate from the CEO position? Because I've heard both, and I'm just generally curious on you guys' thoughts.
I think, and I referenced this in my video too, there's the Common Sense Skeptic put together a plan that he had proposed and published that the Tesla shareholders, if they wanted, could vote out Elon and the entire board. And I think that's what would need to happen, because we have to remember that the board was basically handpicked by Elon to support him in everything and anything that he did, whether it was SEC investigations, all of the OSHA violations, all of these things that he was being investigated for. Any other CEO would have been removed long ago. But the board is part of it.
I probably push back a little bit of that. I think that's probably true in the automotive space. You can argue whether they're a tech company or not. I think that's totally fine. But you do see much more of this. And once again, I do think he was probably the one that's been at the kind of the crosshairs for a lot of these things. But I'm just, once again, just sharing, curious about it. But I think that what has been more common from what we've seen of social media, a lot of the tech companies, and obviously the previous administration's kind of interest around breaking up some of the big tech. And I think going back to your point about the actual valuation of the company, definitely fair as to whether it's a tech company or still focused on the car business. But I think it is just one of those things that's been really fascinating to kind of watch play out. And these things are kind of tested. And I mean, in the election, I believe it was him that was saying that if it went the other way, he was going to be arrested. And sometimes he would laugh about that. I don't know if he was how literally he was meaning that. But I am curious to see what happens, because I do think what this does remind me of a lot with how you're kind of talking about exactly the board setup. It is more of what we see with the traditional tech companies, where they follow the Steve Jobs kind of legend of like, well, if you don't have full control, you'll eventually get pushed out, as kind of what happened with, I believe it was Mike Scully when he had hired the Pepsi CEO to kind of replace him. And then eventually Scully and the board pushed him out. And as far, I mean, you're right. Like from a traditional automotive, you just don't see that kind of organization and that kind of much power in one person. Now, Walter and Steve, I'm curious on your thoughts of if you think he has to fully leave, or if it's in the middle. And to be honest with you, I'm curious. I think there is, personally, I think there's a bigger chance if he was to, I could see him like being some sort of product role. I think if he was to leave the company fully, just even from the stock price and other things, it probably would be much more destructive. But I understand the kind of personal beliefs of it too. I'm kind of just saying this from what I see as more likely outcomes, especially with someone who owns so much of the company.
So if the thought is that a short-term bluster could be overreacted to, causing long-term harm to the company, I believe is what you're referring to, Chase, with if
no,
I
wouldn't say short-term bluster. I'm just saying we've seen this, not specifically this, But we've seen in other organizations where, I mean, this is pretty different, but just recently, Peter Rawlinson of Lucid was kind of most likely asked to step down, and now he's still a paid member kind of on the board. I'm just generally curious if you think, with the sentiment that we've kind of discussed tonight, does he have to permanently leave, or does he need to be in that kind of role somehow attached and maybe just less of a public figure about it?
I personally think Elon Musk can make more money if he severs ties with Tesla completely and pursues other
stock. Or
pardon me.
I'm curious because
No,
I believe
I think the stock price. I think the stock
also in SpaceX. So are you just saying he would sell the stock, or just kind of sit
no,
on
no,
it?
no. His stock price would continue to stay stable. I think if he stays as a presence in Tesla, the likelihood of the stock price bubble bursting is pretty real. If he leaves, I think the chance of the bubble bursting is less likely. That's my personal opinion. However, I think there's another option. They could sell it. They could sell the car company to another OEM that might be willing to purchase them. They could spin off the autonomy unit into some other entity that has its own market cap tied to it. And then maybe a rideshare division or something in the charging infrastructure to somewhere else. And so I think that might be something if the bubble bursts and the stock price really tanks, and there's got to be a viable option that they'll start to discuss, at least in my personal opinion.
Do you think he really has an interest in, I mean, obviously a financial interest in Tesla now, but it seems like he's been disengaged from, what the core mission is to transform the country and the continent plus the world as wider to sustainable transportation. It seems like to me like he hasn't been. I would almost go all the way back to the launch of the Model Y. Like, he didn't seem that interested in the Y as a product. He knew it was going to be their mainstream product. I think he was super interested in the Cybertruck, of course, because that was kind of his pet. I would say that, to me, that's the last time I thought he was excited about a product that Tesla made. Like, everything else has since been SpaceX.
It's definitely around autonomy as far as like excitement around Tesla as a brand.
Yeah, but even there, it seems to be less and less of the kind of his focus. I mean, I think, to me, he actually could step away from Tesla in some capacity. I don't know how much it would take to reset the brand. I think there's always going to be that kind of association now. It's very hard to move away from. But if you could start to, as a company, emphasize the kind of things, people like Max de Zegger and the
for sure. I mean, I think that's a great call out, because you're totally right. There's been so much more of the employee focus and the actual system running in place versus like him going out and doing the kind of product pitches as there used to be. And that might just be also due to company size.
Yeah, I mean, and it is that point, right? I mean, for a while they had this at Google, and Apple obviously was a slightly different scenario, but there's a point where the startup energy and the move fast, break things kind of approach doesn't actually work very well anymore. You need to start being orderly and have a product roadmap that isn't just hope that the Cybertruck sells well, or hope this refresh kind of figures things out. Because as much as I think it looks better, I don't think the Model Y is going to be any significantly different as a sales proposition come this summer, because of the slightly different looks, than it will to this is going to be the dominant topic, I think, for the rest of the year, at least, unless there's some kind of substantial move to separate the man from the brand. Whether that can happen, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of people there that could take it in a very, very positive direction and maybe start to repair some of the damage. But it isn't seeming like it's going to go that way at the moment. It still seems like everybody is obsessed with having that association be the only one that hits the headlines.
Well, and I mean, I think part of this too is Elon certainly loves the attention, right? Like I feel like, to your point, Steve, it might not be that he's the right person to be selling, but look at everything that he's done. It's all a show. It's all I won't even go to the idiocracy references, but I mean, he's running around with golden chainsaws, waving them in the air. Like, all of this seems to me like even when he's, and maybe this is to your point, even when he's representing Tesla in his official capacity as a CEO, it seems more about him than it is about the company or the technology at this point, which isn't necessarily good for the company or the brand. And it does kind of violate your, I think someone mentioned it, fiduciary duty as a CEO to a company. So when you make it more about you than about the company and the product and the offerings.
Some of the questions here are just kind of like, these are the things that interest me. Rooftop solar, the home energy storage, the vehicle. I mean, I haven't ever really been on the leading edge of, bidirectional power, but certainly that's a capability that would be particularly, interesting if it came to the Model Y and Model 3 kind of standard vehicles. But that kind of stuff, that's what I mean. That stuff hasn't been front and center. It's been kind of an afterthought. Like, even on the Cybertruck, it was the bidirectional power was like, oh, I can do it, but it's not going to be, this isn't on a big roadmap kind of announcement this year. It's just, the refreshes that we've had and the vehicles getting, little upgrades here and there, and then obviously full self-driving and robo-taxi, as Mike kind of pointed out. It's mostly the cybercab kind of stuff that has taken the headlines over the years. And I accept that the whole Tesla's not a car company, it's a technology company, or Tesla's not a car company, it's a autonomy company. I get that side of it, but there's so much you could do with the talent that they have there on the wider energy ecosystem. That's where I'd really like to see progress start to be made, and it just doesn't feel like that is coming from the top. I think there's interest within the company to kind of push that kind of stuff out, but it doesn't seem like there's any momentum to kind of move in that direction that was once, seeming like it would move to a full ecosystem of vehicles, energy storage, power transfer, all the kind of stuff that grid connections might be well placed to consult on. I don't know. It's there's a lot more to kind of get into here, and we're coming up on 1 hour and 20 minutes. Do you want to stay on the topic? Do you want to kind of finish off with it, or should we move on to something that's a bit more positive as a final kind of end note? Anybody got any references?
I just wanted to know, are you still waiting for your Roadster, Steve?
Me? I've launched it into space, so I just figure it's somewhere near the start.
That one. That one. Yeah. Okay.
Much more. Yeah. Well, let's. I guess and if you're in the comments here, we've got let's go a minute or 90 seconds here, and everybody just kind of weigh in on whether you want to stay finishing off with the Elon and Tesla side, or do we want to move on to something that's more infrastructure related and kind of take comments. But I mean, from my perspective, there's so much going on in the industry right now that I would want. It would be nice to have a stable Tesla. It would be nice to have a Tesla that was just out there kind of setting the benchmarks and moving on from the kind of controversies that we've had. But it's hard to kind of say. It looks like move on is mostly the sentiment here. Let's see. I'm looking to Crazy Postman to kind of lighten the tone with some jokes. Usually he's reliable for that. But all right, move on then. So one of the things I guess we can look at is how many players are starting to come in to the market. If we say, there's a segue, I guess, Tesla, has been the king of infrastructure, and everybody was talking about, moving to the superchargers being the be all and end all. Even if this ends up being kind of people don't want to go there for the reasons we've discussed tonight, all of these players coming in, to me, there's kind of a critical mass now of so many with Iona, Mercedes-Benz, high power charging. Pilot Flying J, BP Pulse. I won't put Shell Recharge in there because they're not impressing me, but I do have to cover them at some point. Walter, you're a good one to go to for this because you're tracking most of them. And maybe you can call out anybody who needs to take some projects off your hands. But what should we look at to kind of, make much more of an interesting and positive feel towards the infrastructure and EV driving side?
Two things. One, did I hear correctly that EA is still increasing stall count? Like they're not done with the expansions?
To an extent, but only on the projects they already had in the go. They're looking to stuff like California's NEVI, which is still going on. Everybody knows.
Yeah, they got a lot of NEVI awards in California, right?
Yeah, and they're part of, obviously, they're now the go-to partner for Evolve New York and the New York Power Authority, have been for quite a while. So any new station that opens in New York, and New York is pushing on with NEVI, is Electrify America. So they're still rolling. They're just not, everything they're focused on at the moment is finishing up kind of the stuff in Landon's area, the Arkansas kind of old 5-6 year stations. They want them upgraded to the latest hardware before they really start to push expansion. Exactly.
And I've been pretty impressed. I mean, with the new CEO, it took him a couple of years, but I actually think he's started to been a problem solver. And EA is definitely starting to impress me. I'm looking for a new CPO to marry myself to, and it very well might be EA. But to answer your question, there was a slide in the EVgo investor deck where there was a picture of a flagship station, and it didn't look AI rendered. I've been trying to figure out where
it's getting harder to tell these days.
Yeah, I know. It could have been AI rendered, exactly, but there was a couple of cars there, and they definitely didn't. They looked like they had people in them and everything, but the foliage looked like Florida. And boy, I was staring at the picture for it. So, answer your question: the flagship locations coming from EVgo, the beacon stations coming from IONNA, the gigahubs coming from BP Pulse, the big Oasis coming from the Tesla Supercharger. So all this one-upmanship of these super large Instagrammable stations that will start to pepper the United States and Canada throughout 2025 is really what I'm looking forward to, because everyone's leveling up their game. This little dinky 4-stall station is going to look laughable as these other new ginormous stations start coming online through 2025. And there's a lot of them.
Chase, you head out on a road trip and decide superchargers are boring now, or you want to get some new CPO action in your life. Who are you choosing?
Yeah, I drive through pretty remote places. So unfortunately, it's probably going to be Electrify America. It's got like the next best coverage. And even when I drove through the middle of Nevada, now there's actually a supercharger that just opened. I saw this past week, but I think it's Battle Mountain, Nevada. I charge at the EA there, and first time plug-in didn't work, but it moved to stall and it worked. And then drove through Austin, Nevada, on the loneliest highway in America, or so they claim, down to Vegas, and then down to Phoenix from there. So I think it's just great to see. And it was a little concerning, but I checked the app. It said it was live, and it was not 100% accurate, but it was a good basis. And I think for a lot of my drives, EA is probably the one. Personally, I'm really excited to see more IONNA, Flying J, all the great stuff Walter talks about. And as a spoiler, some of the great stuff we talk about in tomorrow's Grid Connections podcast with Walter. But I think overall, I just love to see more of these on the West Coast. And just one of these things, I think I even brought up last time I was speaking with all of you guys, but there's such an interesting divide to me when it comes to, like, it's getting better, but EV charger coverage when you start going west of the Missouri. And obviously some of that's due to kind of population and existing infrastructure, but it's finally starting to get it fleshed out better. I will probably be driving later this month down to Vegas for the EV Charging Summit Expo, and I'm planning to do a couple of non-Teslas along the way. It's just where I'm driving through, it's pretty much right through southeastern Oregon down to Winnemucca, Nevada, and then through some pretty remote places. So the best options are Tesla ones for the most part. But even the last time I did a road trip, I brought both my CCS adapter and, because I wasn't in a huge rush that time, the ancient feeling Chatamo adapter I had, so that once I got to Austin, Nevada, I could actually test this thing and make sure it was working. And one of the chargers was down, but it was accurately displaying it in its app, and the other one worked just fine and plugged in, and it was a great trip. But yeah, I'm really excited to see more Pilot Flying J and Iona on the West Coast personally.
I think that CHAdeMO adapter is best used as security now. Your cudgel for anyone who's trying
you bring that thing out of the trunk of a car and people think you're like getting a baseball bat or some sort of weapon. So speaking of violence and superchargers, maybe that people are just seeing these CHAdeMO adapters brought out. But no, I think I'm curious. What is it? One, I want to hear what you're going to say for that question, Steve. But two, I'm just kind of curious, like going into 2025, it's March now. What are the things that you guys are looking the most for a DC fast charging provider?
I'm excited by Iona because of where they're starting to build out. The map Walter pointed this out in his last update. It looks like it's taking shape along I-70, and they're starting to go for these. I quite like these cross-country routes that they, when it becomes clear that, pins start to drop on the map and you get a feel for what the team is trying to do. It's the only team short of Pilot Flying J who could have built the quickest cross-country network. Tesla still had it at about, I think it was 16, 17 months, albeit a little bit jinky here or there with some of the routes. But it looks like Iona has the money and the intent potentially to build this cross-country network. And I think they may also go into areas that, won't necessarily be profitable. Sometimes they may go in for the local kind of value of it. So all of that together, I like. And the reason that, it kind of segues with your question, Chase, is that I think when you start to get this focus on amenities and actually wanting to have something next to it, like they're making this effort to either partner with companies that can do it, Sheets, Wawa, it looks like will be one of them, and starting to get into places where there's already amenities, or they're going to build it themselves. They'll just put money into it and say this location will be so valuable that or is going to be so nice for EV drivers that we're going to start to find a local business, get some vibes that match the region, and I don't think anyone's done that, honestly. I think Pilot Flying J has the essence of it with the 24/7, but there's not really that much personality there. They're just very good builders, and they have the properties, and they
exactly existing infrastructure to kind of help support it.
Which is great. We needed it, and Walter got excited about it when fees going up 18 months ago. But it's amazing to me now to kind of look at that and say, oh yeah, we'd expect that, right? That's something that Pilot Flying J does. But to get into this point where there's a company who's building, or not a company, but an entity who's building this stuff out and is potentially going to focus almost exclusively on the driver experience, that's something I'm kind of really watching and hopeful for this year. Eric, want to make sure we go to you as well. And I don't know, I won't prejudge your guess, but your recent videos do suggest where you might be looking, but let me hand it to you.
Oh yeah. So Electrify America. Electric Era has been doing great work. I just visited their.
That's a good call.
Their Williams site, and then with SkyCharger, they're getting a number of those NEVI grants, which we assume are going through. At least the first phase for NEVI in California will go through. It looks like. So that's going to be a massive build out. And I trolled the chat with the EV range. They've been busier than I've given them credit for. They have a bunch of chargers going in. There's actually now a connection from the Salton Sea all the way down to the Mexico border, all with EV range. So they're doing a lot of good work. As well, putting in some multi-charger sites. So, and then of course around the Tahoe region, and that's Chase. I know you and I kind of share that sort of rural-ish area, even though we're technically in the EV mecca of the United States.
Once you get away from I-5, that drops off pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Electric Era, EV range, covering some of those rural routes as well as some additional support. And actually, I'm glad Mike mentioned something about NACS. I saw someone earlier ask about EVgo and when they're going to start doing NACS. And apparently there are a couple of EVgo sites that are already all NACS, all J3400s. So It's EVgo. We've seen them do that before with CCS1, where they abandon all the CHAdeMO and all CCS1. So I'd expect a mixed bag out of their charging sites in terms of what the plug standard is they're using.
Yeah, I think someone mentioned Electrify America and their NACS plans as well. They've been less interested in it from the origins of VW, but they did mention it in the report that they put out today. But it was just a kind of, we're going to do NACS, J3400 handles at some point. I don't know how that. It's interesting for them because it kind of, they have just the one handle now, right? So they can't do the dual thing, or they'll have to figure out what balance they want to have. Unless they change hardware prices again, which I think they may have been burned with. But
yeah, if ChargePoint goes over, then they can just buy the patents for Omniport.
Here we go again. We're ending on a positive note, damn it.
Oh.
So I did have one, and it helps me. Scott, where did you go? You helped me segue into the next show, but then I lost it. So wherever it was, I lost it. But the point was, Plug&Charge is what he was excited for, and that helps me shout out the next one. There you go. Thank you very much. Plug&Charge everywhere, because the next episode we have in 2 weeks' time on, let me check my calendar, the 19th of March, we'll be joined by Nate Steele of Hubject, who will help us unpack this topic, which is just so many folks question about, and I don't think any one of us can unpack, in ourselves. So he's definitely going to be a good person to have on for that. So definitely email me, plugandplayev@gmail.com, if you have specific questions for there. It's going to be our one opportunity, unless he comes back as a regular, to kind of really unpack this and get into it. So it's something that I know a lot of people have wanted to talk about, and that will be the next one. Then we have some other good stuff up in April, but I'm not going to spoil any surprises just yet. So we'll keep on updating the calendar as and when I can. Check us out next day on audio platforms, as I mentioned, usually up within about 24 hours. And I will leave the last mention to Chase. Again, go and help the Grid Connections YouTube channel over the 1,000 subscribers mark, and we can start to see more action on YouTube for sure.
I just want to say thanks again for having me on again, guys. It's always so much fun to talk with you. Eric, I loved your points. Walter, I loved your we went all sorts of places, and I think 90% of that may have been my own ADD kind of flaring up a little bit. But I guess I never did technically answer the official question: can customers separate man from machine? I personally try to avoid armchair experting. I try to go off facts. And this is just one of those ones, especially with a brand like Tesla, it's always so, who knows what the hell is going to happen next. But I'm also a big fan of history. And I think there's definitely going to be some big change probably in store for the brand. But if we look through history, Tesla is probably the modern one, but they are far from the first one to have a very controversial founder, and that has usually stepped away into some either kind of more executive socially removed role or other. So I think that's probably going to be my best guess. When that happens, I don't know, but I could see some sort of product or chairman of the board. And we've seen that with other brands in the automotive space that have successfully done that. And today people buy the vehicles. And this is true for a lot of automotive brands globally. But just now I've actually officially answered the question. It only took us 90 minutes to get to. I just want to say, Steve, Eric, and Walter, always a pleasure. Thanks for the shout out. And also, yes, please check out tomorrow's Grid Connections episode, where we have Walter on as the special guest, and we get to talk about a lot of great topics as well. And I'll be sure to have you guys on another episode soon. But thank you, and just great night, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in. I know we got more serious than we usually like to. Plug&Charge probably won't be quite as polarizing, so bring some technical specs and we'll get into that one on the next one. Thanks, Chase.
I think my cat wants to say hi to Crazy Postman.
Yeah, if you ever need to replace me as a host, the cat is always willing to take over. So thank you, everybody, for your evening. Go hit like if you liked it. You can also dislike it. It's all feedback for the machine. So let us know what you thought, and we will see you in the next one in 2 weeks' time. Thanks so much, everybody. Cheers, nerds.
Mm-hmm.